We are at historic Oakwood Cemetery in Austin, Texas, and I want you to look at this image here. This is the burial ground that dates back to 1839. You'll note that we have a few flowers on graves here and right up in here. But for the most part, this burial ground, and even across Main Street, the area to the south, is completely void of flowers, benches, or other type of items, for the most part, due to the age of the site. And again, I'm spotting some flowers right up in here, placed around a gravesite, but it's due to the age of the cemetery. Most of the families have either died off or moved away from the area, and very few family members come back to visit. Around Christmas time, this will look different. There will be wreaths and other items out. But you don't see the type of activity you see in active burial sections. This is the east side of Oakwood Cemetery, and you can see that a family has come in and put flowers near the headstones of the graves, but they're close to the headstones, and the mowing crews can actually come in here and mow down the rows still. Now we've come across Kamal Street, and now we're in the Oakwood Annex Cemetery. This dates back to 1914 as opposed to 1839. You can see here that again, even from the 1986, the 60s and the 70s, that there's a sparse lack of flowers and other things out here. If you look across the road this way, you can see that families have put flowers in. You can see that families have come by and put flowers next to grave sites, but what they've done is they've used PVC pipes as holders, and the flowers are next to the headstones, and it still allows the city crews to come through and mow. And again, here a family has used a pair of vases that are on the headstone. But again, an older property, it is pretty much easy enough for the city crews to come in here and mow without having to go around obstacles such as benches and curbings, pavers, and other things. I'm in the southwest corner of Oakwood Annex, and this is Babyland, and we're going to show you in contrast here as opposed to over in Evergreen. The worst thing you could ever imagine would be to lose a child or an infant. And notice that while there are a few graves that are marked, most of these infants, for instance from 1947, 1947, even again 1947, so they went in groups. 54. Most of these, the families have either died off or very seldom do they come back and visit. And again, here's one from 47 where we've got a plastic vase that could easily be readdressed with a PVC pipe. But again, this is the difference between the Babyland at the Oakwood Annex. Next, I'm going to show you Babyland over in Evergreen Cemetery. We are in the circle section of the Oakwood Annex Cemetery, and you can see that families have come in here and put flowers, but the flowers are not impeding the lawnmowers right to come down the middle here. They're up against the headstones, or they're in between and right up against. So you still have families that are coming out and remembering loved ones, but they're placing their monuments, their flowers, next to the headstones. They're not impeding the center pathway. That's the way it should be. And again, these are silk Yeah, this is a silk spray inside of a, looks like a paper vase. And again, that's something that the crews have to mow around, and will need to be picked up in time. But again, the crews can pretty effectively come through this cemetery, with the exception of this piece here that was put in. Carriage mount from the family home and an address. And again, Dr. Weno Watt. And again, I don't see the Watt family, and I don't understand how this was placed here, but here's a good example of something that should be considered. This is from the family home, then perhaps it needs to be in between these two. But again, I don't understand, there's no Watts in this area. If we're going to allow our crews to effectively come through and mow our spaces, then if things like this have a significance, then they need to be in line with the stones and not here, so it breaks the rhythm of people coming to mow. Here's an example of a bench, a non-approved bench, something you would find at the store. It had little legs. It is not solid in the aspect of, if somebody were to sit on that and get injured, the city might be liable because they allowed it to remain and it was forbidden by the rules. I'm now at Historic Evergreen Cemetery, and this is the main gate right off of 12th Street. And this is the original part of this cemetery that was established in 1928. And again, you'll find older burials and more recent burials in here. But again, you can see that they have rows of headstones, and families have chosen to put flowers on, but the flowers are on the headstone bases or in line with the monuments. Again, we discourage vases, be they plastic, especially glass, because they hold water. But you can see that this is relatively easy to mow and maintain for the crews by going up and down these rows without a whole lot of interference. The same can be true for this side over here. If we come back over here, you can see that families, for the most part, abide by the rules, and they place their flowers up against the headstones in what we call the monument, the little buffer, the zone, and that still allows the crews to come through here and mow. There's a little bit more extra weed eating to do around these objects, but for the most part, city crews can come down here and go through these rows. Here you can see that these have kind of sunk down, and when the crews come through, this creates a problem for the mowers, because the guy riding the mower has to take a dip down and up, and that's hard on your back. But for the most part, this is all in line and relatively easy to mow and maintain. So again, we're over here toward the intersection of 12th and Airport, and again, we still have very good clean lines with flowers and other things not obstructing the pathways, and allowing the families to put flowers and other things in without really causing a lot of increased workload. Now we're going to come to this area here. Notice the stark difference between this and this. So this is because this is one of the newer sections. This is the restroom. From just about here, you can see over here everything's fine, but right about here is when there used to be an old garage right here in this area, and over here where you see the Todd, there used to be a house. This was the old caretaker's house. This is still part of the 1928 property, but it was just opened up for burials recently, and the city has lost control. And again, not trying to pick on any one family, but you can see that by putting up fencing, curbing, solar lights, and other things, that the crews can no longer come through here and methodically go up and down the rows and mow and maintain the property. Every time you put an obstacle in the way, that increases our workload for our crews. And when you do things like this and you put in gravel, then it takes a lot of extra time to get in there and clean that up. A lot of things get put around the grave sites, and if a mower strikes it, it's ejected out at 420 feet per second. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about all these little solar lights that you go down to the dollar store and buy, and the little wire fencing, excess flowers. You know, what is excess? Gravel. You know, people are going to put out things for New Year's and all the holidays, and while it is going to be a touchy subject, in order to do this, the city needs to get control back and be able to come in and remove the fencings, the excess plantings, all the little rocks and the other things, and have some uniformity so we can keep our maintenance cost within reason and ensure that our mowers aren't getting tangled up in things, or we're not running over things like gravel and ejecting it from our mowers and possibly striking somebody who may be visiting 30 or 40 feet away. We're in Evergreen Cemetery in Section K. This is known as Little K. This is a relatively new section, and you can see that, again, the city does not enforce the rules. They lost control, and people come in and put wire fencing in, and curbing, and rock, and all kinds of things through here. And so this makes it virtually impossible for the mowing crews to come in here with a mower and mow down that path or this path. Whether it's pavers, fencing, gravel, any number of things, the city crews need to be able to effectively come through here and maintain the site without having to stop and weed eat around every little thing. Again, this is a newer burial section. Give it about 10 years, the families will stop coming, and then in the past, the contractor would just come in here and start picking everything up and throwing it away. Nobody would say anything about it. But how many years do we have to have an increased maintenance budget to deal with not being able to come down rows and mow? So again, we talk about benches. This is an example of a bench that is not an approved bench from a memorial company. It's something that you could go to Home Depot and buy. Although it looks nice, it's not pinned together, it's not stable. If somebody were to sit on that and the thing collapsed, the city could be held liable. And again, gravel and all these other things. And again, not trying to pick on any one individual. And people will come in here and do things like this. This is historically African American, but we're seeing a lot of Hispanics using it because it's the cheaper option. Once that's in, you're basically stuck with it. And again, this one here, this is a very nice bench. This is an approved bench, and this is for this family here. So you can see that while it doesn't interfere a whole lot, it still allows the mowers to come through. Families can sit and grieve here and look at this. We find some more examples this way. So again, another picture of some Hispanic architecture. Again, this is a cultural difference. Had we had a strict rule in place and enforced it, this wouldn't have been here. But people sneak in on the weekends and build whatever they want, and the city is at a loss on what to do afterwards. Again, you have a volunteer tree growing up here. You've got all this little metal things. There are some people that feel that, you know, they don't want anybody walking on top of their parents' graves or their spouse's grave. But the reality is we have to be able to come through and mow and maintain. Glass vases, again, attract mosquitoes. If they fall over, they break. They can shred tires on mowers or send glass flying. There's a reason they have rules. But again, the city has lost control and has been afraid of bad publicity, and this is the end result. An increased workload, staff that gets frustrated and eventually just leave. We have to empower our employees to do the job and look after the best interest of all of the taxpayers, and just educate families that we need to keep flowers and decorations up against the headstones, and we can't put gravel and fences and other things in. The mowers have to be able to come in and do their job. Again, another fine example of a bench that is very well made and is not impeding the mowing path. We won't see too many benches that are the inexpensive type here, but you'll see a lot of that at Austin Memorial Park. Here someone's going to come in and put fake astroturf. While it looks nice and there are areas that we don't get any grass growing underneath the trees, if a mower were to hit this, it's going to get caught up in the bottom of its blades and create a problem. It's very easy for a mower to bend a shaft besides an entanglement, and once you bend a shaft on a mower, you just flush $10,000. So again, looks like we have a pretty good row until we reach the end here, and we have a mound with a bunch of knickknacks and things on it that prevents the crews from coming down here and turning around. They almost have to back up or do a 3 or 5 point turn. Again, this is a great option. It is a bench that's actually serving as the function of the headstone. However, we have small little pebbles at the base of it, which create a maintenance issue. Again, Evergreen Cemetery, we're in section F-H. This is the Babyland. I showed you what Babyland looked like over in the annex. And it's starkly different because that all dates back to the 40s and 50s. The worst possible thing you can do is to lose a child. I think everybody can agree with that. But you can see what happens here is we get plush toys, other kind of toys, and things get left here. The city crew really can't clean up around this. Now there's a rope wire here that lights up at night, or it did at one point. And then you have things like this. And again, I'm not trying to be difficult. A lot of times parents don't have a lot of money. They can't afford a marker. And we certainly should consider different rules or more lenient rules for Babyland, or what is typically known as the infant burial ground. But you can see that, and I've seen, brothers and sisters coming in playing cars with their siblings that have passed. And so there is a healing process that's here, but you can see some of the challenges that staff faces in trying to come through here and mow and maintain things without getting a huge amount of backlash from families because the toys have been scattered or something is broken or knocked down. And again, we have a little fencing and rock work. This one here is very unique. You can see that there's an acrylic piece here, but it looks like it's on backwards. Everything is upside down. Perhaps it's fallen over. So again, here in Evergreen Cemetery over in Babyland, we have a very nice acrylic piece, and the way it's sitting, that's the back side of it. But what you see here is this piece and this piece were at one time glued onto this, but the glue gave way. Now the only thing that keeps this from being on the ground is the photo that was right here. They had to turn the thing upside down in order to get it to hold. So again, a non-approved monument that was put here. Somebody spent a lot of money, but they didn't bother going through the process of getting it approved. And eventually, they're going to have to come up with another solution. All right, we're at Plummer Cemetery. Dates back to 1890s when Oakwood had run out of space. Very few new burials have happened in here in the last 15 years or so. The city owns this since 1957. Did not get a burial list. The inventory we know is basically just by the headstones that we have on site. We do not have a problem here with excessive decorations because most of these descendants have died off or perhaps moved out of the area. And again, there are some flowers here, but for the most part, yeah, here's a new burial right here. But for the most part, when you look across this landscape, you're not going to see the type of obstructions that we just saw over at Evergreen. The crews, for the most part, can come through here and mow and maintain this property without having to spend excess time with weed eaters working around flowers. And again, this is a burial over here. If I remember right, it was a woman whose husband died 35 years prior, and she joined him at rest here. But again, an older property, this is what you're going to end up with like you had at Oakwood. Eventually, it becomes easy to maintain. The question remains, do you enforce the rules and make it easy for yourself now, or do you bow to the concerns of a few who cite religious or cultural rights and create a much harder time for your workforce and increase cost to the taxpayers?